Today is June 21st, 2012. I'm interviewing Andrew Shetland at the Nautilus Submarine Museum in Groton, Connecticut. Interviewer is Eileen Hurst from CCSU. Andrew, for the record, would you state your full name, your date of birth, and your current address?
Andrew Shetland, August 21st, 1977, 10 Gill Drive, Griswold, Connecticut, 06351.
In which war did you serve?
Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan.
And what branch of the service were you in?
The Army.
Andy, what was your highest rank?
Staff Sergeant.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted.
You recall the year?
I first enlisted in 1994, August 1994. I was 17, right out of high school.
Where were you living at the time?
Groton, Connecticut. Just right where we're at right now.
So this is your hometown.
Yeah.
Why did you enlist?
Initially, I enlisted for college benefits in the Connecticut Army National Guard. So the Connecticut offers a 100% tuition waiver to veterans, and with the GI Bill, it was a good way for me to pay for college.
In 1994, you joined the Army?
I did. I joined the Army National Guard.
And after you enlisted, where did you go? Did you immediately go for induction?
Yeah, I went right away to basic training in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. I enlisted as a combat engineer. So I went through basic combat training and combat engineer advanced initial training back to back right in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
How long were you there for basic training?
I think it was like 3.5 or 4 months for both of the schools combined.
Were they both going on at the same time, or did you have basic training and then the combat engineer?
They call it one station unit training, or OSUT. So all of the training cadre, or the drill sergeants that trained you in basic training, trained you for combat engineer training too. So it went from one right into the next without a break.
Why did you choose combat engineering? Did you want to be an engineer when you were civilian?
Honestly, I talked to the recruiter, and I was enrolled to go to the University of Connecticut in Storrs. So I said, well, what unit is closest to Yukon? And it just happened that this Bravo company of the 242nd Engineer Battalion was located in Rockville, Connecticut, about 15-20 minutes from Yukon. So that's why I picked it. And it had the shortest training requirement, so I could go to school and be back and go to college in the fall with no like miss in education.
So you were going to go to Missouri, do the training, and then come back to Connecticut and go to college in the fall?
Yeah.
Is that what you did? I
did, but then when I got to college, I didn't really know what I wanted to study. I kind of had lost direction, and so by the first semester of college, I wasn't doing very well, and I withdrew from all my classes. Then I kind of hung around bus tables and waited tables for a while, and got a conditional release to go active duty, and I went active duty Navy for 4 years in 1996.
You requested to go active duty?
Yep.
Why did you switch from the Army to the Navy?
Well, like I said, it was kind of random how I became a combat engineer. I just did it because it was the closest thing to Yukon. So when I wanted to go active duty, I was figuring I wanted some other training. I wanted to do something that was more interesting to me. And then the Navy offered me that, and the Army said, no, if you come active duty with us, you got to keep the training we gave you and go active duty as a combat engineer.
So you could choose to switch branches? Are you still considered Army, or at that point do you
become
Navy?
That's a longer story. So I served active duty in the Navy for 4 years and got out in 2000 after starting a family. So in September 11, 2001, I was no longer in the service.
Well, go back to your 4 years in the Navy.
Okay.
So once the Army cut you loose and you became a Navy man, what did you do? What was your job in the Navy?
Well, then I went to Navy basic training at Great Lakes, Illinois for 3 months.
And what was that like?
It was just cold in Chicago, just outside Chicago, Illinois. It was really cold in the wintertime, so there was that. The Navy basic training was a little bit different. It was more academically focused than physically focused. So it was about firefighting and damage control, and then the Navy traditions and the way of life in the Navy. But the Army was a lot of, how to survive a 10-mile or 12-mile ruck march, and how to do individual movement techniques in tactical situations in the Army. But
in the Navy, while you were in basic, did you know what job you were going to have in the Navy?
I did. I was going to be a nuclear machinist mate.
Did you choose that, or did they choose it for you?
Well, they had me take some initial advanced placement tests for they call it the NFQT, the nuclear qualification test, and so I scored very well on it, and then they convinced me to go nuclear Navy, and I did. But I told you before, when I got to college, I wasn't really studying either. So when I got down to nuclear power school, that same study ethic followed me, and I spent more of my time like out having a good time and partying, and ended up getting kicked out of that school and sent to my first duty station, which was the USS John F. Kennedy aircraft carrier out of Mayport, Florida. And
what did you do on that?
Well, I started out as a non-designated fireman recruit, which means I didn't have a job except for to chip paint and wax floors and be like the general purpose guy do all guy. And I did that for, they have the new guys they have come on ship, they have them crank, they call it, which means they give you temporary duty to the galley, or that's where they cook food and clean dishes. So for 6 months on board, all I did was clean dishes. But that's not entirely true, because I started working there and I realized I had mechanical aptitude, and on ship like carrier, they have big elevator systems that bring the food stores from the hangar deck all the way down into these lower levels of the ship where they store the food. So I realized I had some mechanical aptitude and come from engineering, so it had me start working in their, I forget what they called that division, like a stores division, bringing foodstuffs on and working on their elevators. So I did that for 6 months.
Now, the whole time you were on the Kennedy, were you in port or were you out at sea?
Oh, it was both. It was an operational vessel, so I was a fireman recruit, non-designated for a while, and then after my first year, I took the, they call it the third class exam, and they call it striking. I struck machinist mate, conventional, and then from there on, I worked in the #1 main machinery room aboard the USS John F. Kennedy. And we would go out and do operations, training operations, flight operations in the Caribbean for a couple months at a time or a couple weeks at a time, and back and forth to Mayport. But in 96 to 97, I got deployed to the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf aboard the Kennedy, where we would do operations in the Med and the Persian Gulf, and then every couple weeks we'd pull into ports along the Mediterranean and then in the Red Sea and in the Persian Gulf. And then in 99 and 2000, I also got deployed for the same kind of thing, but we spent more time in 2000 in the Persian Gulf.
Now, we weren't at war at that time, so what kinds of activities would you be involved in?
So 96, 97, we were still dealing with supporting the Balkans War, or the breakdown of Yugoslavia. So we spent a lot of time in the Adriatic Sea, doing a lot of flight operations to support those efforts. Then in 2000, after the war in the 90s with Iraq, we enforced these no-fly areas. So Saddam Hussein wasn't allowed to fly in those areas, but we actually enforced that by flying over our fighter jets over those areas, and that's what the carrier was doing in the Persian Gulf, was supporting the no-fly zone over Iraq.
So that was 96 to 2000.
Mm-hmm.
What did you do in 2000 when your commitment was up?
My wife and I moved back to Connecticut from Florida, and then, I don't know, we bought a house. I started working as a mechanic in a factory in Norwich, and I quickly realized that I couldn't do that the rest of my life, and I needed to use those education benefits that I joined to begin with for, and I started going back to college at the community college, Three Rivers Community College, for a degree in engineering technology. And then, in parallel with that, September 11th occurred a year and a half after I got out of the Navy, and I started feeling like my time wasn't over. So my wife and I argued about that for a good year before, in 2003, I enlisted in the National Guard. And I went back in to the engineers that I had left to.
Combat engineers?
Yep.
So you enlisted in the National Guard, so you're going back to the Army?
Yeah, I
Why
went.
didn't you go back to the Navy?
At that time, I had almost 10 years in, and I was only a E4 or a machinist mate 3rd class, or in the Army it's called a specialist or a corporal. And the Navy has this thing called high year tenure. So if you're not a certain pay grade by a certain number of years, then you just get put out. And the Army was hurting for bodies, and that's what I was a fresh body.
So you convinced your wife and you re-enlisted?
Well, she gave me one of those, whatever you decide, honeys. So I think she really meant don't do it, but I did it.
You
So
interpreted it differently.
yeah.
So in 2003 you enlisted again. Where were you living at that time?
My wife and I had settled down in Griswold, Connecticut. We'd bought our house. We had 2 children, 2 young daughters. In 2003, my youngest was just born in March, and in 2001, my oldest was born, so Caitlin and Gwyneth. And so we were living in Griswold in 2003 when I joined the Army. And I told her, I said, listen, this is the National Guard. We're here to help out. Like those guys down in New York City when those towers fell down, that supported saving lives and removing rubble and bringing normalcy back to the city. That's what the National Guard's for. But my wife insisted that I'd get deployed if I joined the Guard. And I said, no, it's the National Guard. Don't worry about it, honey. Things are different today than they were in 03.
So when you enlisted in 03, did you have to go to basic training again?
No, because I'd already been. Twice, actually.
So it counted.
Yeah, it counted. I had to do like a basic combat refresher thing, but it was just a couple weeks worth of training.
So what were your responsibilities as a National Guardsman?
As a guardsman, your typical duty is to train 1 week in a month and to train 2 weeks in the summertime every year. That's what your minimum requirement is. I came back in as a specialist, and they realized I had some leadership capabilities and made me a corporal in charge of a team in the engineers rather. And on those drill weekends, I would manage my team of 3 to 5 engineers, and we'd go out and do training missions, which like route clearance or we'd do some demolition training, clear landmine fields, that kind of stuff.
When did it change to something more than just weekend training?
So I enlisted for 3 years. In 2006, I was about to separate again. I realized my kids were getting older, and I realized I was probably going to end up going to war. And right when I made the decision to get out, I got orders to deploy to Afghanistan for a year, and I got stop lost. That's what they call it. Stop loss means I know your enlistment's up, but you can get out when you're done with war. So they realized that they were restructuring the state to go to a different type of organization, and they didn't need the 242 engineers anymore. So they disbanded that battalion of people, and they involuntarily converted us into infantrymen.
So the combat battalion unit became an infantry unit?
The people that were in it were then attached to an infantry battalion that already existed. So the 1st of the 102nd Infantry was plussed up with all of us engineers. And what they did was they sent us all to a 2-week infantry crash course and gave us all the infantry MOS. So then
What was the crash course?
I happened to go to Camp Shelby, Mississippi, right after Hurricane Katrina, actually. So it was a pretty rough place to train.
And what did they train you in?
Infantry doctrine, which is the old infantry doctrine, is the Army's Field Manual 7-8. It just covers like how to react to contact, how to move to contact, how to enter and clear a trench, or how to enter and clear a bunker, how to engage the enemy. And
So all your training in the combat engineering aspect of it, you weren't going to use anymore?
most of the stuff that was specific to engineering, no, I wasn't going to use that anymore. But the way the Army looks at it, and the way the Army trains is, everybody's infantry first. So when you go to basic training, all that stuff that we focused on at that infantry school was what you got trained on.
After your 2 weeks at Camp Shelby, where'd you go?
Then we did train up at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. So that whole battalion went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and then the 102nd Infantry guys and 242 engineer guys were kind of integrated in with one another. and they mixed them up. That way there was a good mix of both backgrounds. And then I was assigned to the Bravo Company of the 102nd Infantry. I was 1st Platoon under this guy, Sergeant Butler, and then they gave me a team in 2nd Squad. So I had Alpha Team, 2nd Squad.
As a team leader, what were your responsibilities?
As a team leader, you're responsible for personnel training, mentoring, and equipment accountability. So you have to get to know your guys, the guys that are assigned to you in your team. You have to find out what their strengths and weaknesses are, and it's your responsibility to bring that up the chain of command so that you can get the type of training you need to fill those weaknesses. So I remember all the guys on my team. I had the guy named Ernie Rivera and another guy, Greg Taylor, and myself, and let's see, my squad leader was Thorstensen. So what we did was just went out and started training together and doing those react to contact drills and do those enter and clear a room. And although there's doctrine on how to do it, unless you rehearse it and train it and practice it over and over again, when you get out there to do it for real, everybody really won't know how to work with one another.
How big was your team?
It was like 3 to 5. Some guys would come and go and they'd reorg and collapse depending on who was going on mid-tour leave or what the missions were. So I had some other guys that would come and go off my team.
But you knew you were all training to go to Afghanistan?
Yeah, our platoon trained together every day. For those, it was like 4 months actually. It was 4 months at Fort Bragg before we actually put boots on ground in Afghanistan. Did I know I was trained? No, this was all happening pretty fast. I was scared. And I remember we landed at Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan, which is a pretty secure place now in retrospect, but I remember being scared and walking around with my weapon at the ready, even though I'm on this base, this Fortress America base, for a while before I finally got more comfortable with my surroundings.
So what was it like when you landed? Do you recall the month that you left the United States?
I recall everything like it was yesterday.
So describe that to me. What was that like?
Well, let's see, it was April, so we had just had Easter. They gave us some time off for Easter. And I remember not enough time to go back to Connecticut. So I had my wife and kids come down, and we spent that Easter weekend. It was a long weekend, probably a 4-day weekend they gave us. And we stayed in like the Army Lodge or whatever they call it for post like housing. So it was a less expensive hotel. And we just went to, had Easter dinner together, went to services together. And I remember we took the kids out horseback riding. So it was like this last surreal moment that you can have to spend some time with your family before you know you're going to war, and inside you don't know if you're coming home. So I remember that, and I remember feeling very sad that my family was going to be leaving and I was going to war. Then we all went to this big personnel terminal at Fort Bragg, and we got on these gigantic aircraft and flew to Maine before we flew across to get to country, and we stayed. They had this big USO area. The airport was kind of empty actually. I remember thinking there's nobody here, and I don't remember what town we were in Maine, but it was somewhere up maybe Brunswick or something. But then we flew over to Ireland, and then we flew to Germany, then we flew to someplace Manis, Kyrgyzstan, I think it was. Stayed there for another week or so. Well, we were waited for transportation into Afghanistan, and then we flew right to Bagram Airfield. And then our battalion was assigned to a mission. They called it Provincial Reconstruction. So we were going to go out as teams. The infantry guys were going to provide security to these teams, and then we were plussed up with Navy and Air Force and Army individual augmentees that had been put together onto these teams, whose mission was to go and meet with local population and find out what their needs were, assess those needs, and help to develop projects to improve our relations with the local nationals in Afghanistan, that Win the Hearts and Minds campaign. So all of these different platoons were assigned to these different PRTs, they call them, Provincial Reconstruction Teams. And my platoon somehow got assigned to the Quick Reaction Force out of Bagram Airfield. So everybody else was a PRT security, and then we were going to be the QRF, they call it, out of Bagram, assigned to the Personnel Security Detachment for this colonel from the 10th Mountain Infantry Brigade.
So what did that mean? What was your job?
It was it was a twofold thing. It was to be ready, always ready, 24 hours a day to react to anything that occurred in our area of operation. So we had 2 teams that were always ready with a certain number of trucks, a certain number of guys, and certain like configuration of weapon systems to go with it was, how many kilometers? It was within like a 2-hour drive of this base anyways, in a circle around it. And then we also had a mission to go out daily and do whatever missions they had come up with, to do village assessments or route reconnaissance or route clearance or provide security. So we were constantly going out on missions every day, and we had to be ready to get called to react to something that might happen.
Where were you actually stationed? You didn't stay at Bagram, did you?
Our main station for that year we were in Afghanistan was in Bagram.
So you stayed right there at the air base?
Yeah, Camp Cherry Beasley, I think it was called, right at Bagram Airfield.
Cherry Beasley?
Yeah, it was named for some soldiers from the 29th Infantry Division who had died in Afghanistan. They actually named most of the bases for people who gave their lives in conflict.
So describe that base, the size of it and what was on it.
It was huge. It was like a 10-mile perimeter. And there's an airfield in the middle, to support air operations in Afghanistan. So I don't know how many people were on it at the time, several thousand. That number changes depending on the conflict. I don't know what I can say and can't say actually about that, because we're still kind of supporting operations in Afghanistan.
Where were you on that base? Did you have a specific place?
Yeah. Oh yeah, we had a compound. This is where all our equipment is. This is where our tactical operations center is, and so we had an area that was ours to kind of operate out of.
And you were responsible for the security of that?
No. When you were in the base,
yeah, you were okay.
You could kind of relax. You didn't have to pull security. This was a safe zone. So you could go eat chow, you could go to the gym, there's a PX on base, you could go buy stuff that you need, toiletries and hygiene products. The base was...
only when you were off base. Did you go on missions?
They called it leaving the wire. Yeah. Whenever you left the wire, then you had to ramp up your situational awareness and your level of alertness.
Did you leave the wire every day?
Oh yeah, every day. And sometimes we'd leave and not come back for a week at a time or 2 weeks at a time or whatever the mission dictated.
So can you give me a little bit of description of what a typical mission might be like?
Yeah, we trained as light infantrymen, which means you're going to go everywhere on foot. But then we got issued Humvees and we became like this light mobile unit. So you'd go with a minimum of 3 trucks. Each truck would have 3 personnel in it, a driver, a truck commander, and a person who's going to operate the weapon system or a gunner. So we would go out with that minimum configuration every time. And then and what would we do? Like I was saying before, one mission example would be conduct a village assessment. So they'd say, here's the name of this village, whatever it is, and here's a grid coordinate where we think it's at. We want you to go. We have some intel that says the village leader is this guy's name, and they give us a name. So I'd write all this stuff down. A lot of times I was the convoy commander, which is the guy in charge of all the trucks, and the overall.
How many trucks would go in a convoy?
3.
So there's always 3 trucks together?
Or more. 3 or more. 3 minimum. You'd never go with less than that. So that's 9 guys you'd go out with.
Okay, so you would be the commander and you would get to this village.
Yep, and I'd have my mission, like meet with this guy, and here's your demographic questions. We want you to come back with this intelligence for us. So I'd go out, I had an interpreter with us, and I'd engage the populace and say, hey, my name is such and such, and we're looking for this guy, Abdul Akbar, or whatever his name is. Can you, does anybody know this guy? And sometimes it'd be bogus, and this guy didn't even exist, or they wouldn't tell me who he was, or sometimes they'd say, yeah, this is our, and I'd say, or he doesn't exist. And I'd say, well, who's your leader here? Who's the village elder? Who's the guy responsible for this community? The mayor or whatever you want to call him in the States. So maybe I'd get funneled over to him. We'd be pulling security and moving through the village. And then a conversation would start, just like this. And my interpreter would be standing behind me. I'd talk. He'd interpret. He'd talk. He'd interpret. I'd hear what he said. And I'd write down what I could. And then I'd bring all that back to the base. And they would do with it what they do with it.
On the missions where you would actually stay out in the field for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, what would you do?
There was another outpost. It was a special operations outpost that we would go to, and we'd be bringing them supplies, to, ammunition or food or whatever they
Was
needed.
it an American outpost, but like a small unit?
Yeah, yep. And they did a lot of interoperability with the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Police. So it may have been an American outpost, but it was usually pretty plussed up with Afghan forces.
And you would stay at that post?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Not as nice as Bagram. I mean, there's definitely no green bean coffee or PX to go get some toiletries.
What was the security like?
It was good. Security was good.
So you didn't feel it was a dangerous place to be?
Well, I don't know. You hear reports all the time where the Afghans, National Army or National Police, would turn on their American counterparts and shoot up a bunch of people. So, I mean, eventually you have to kind of just trust in, like, I'm trained. If something happens, I can react to it. And if I can't, then I guess it was my time to go.
Were there any memorable incidents that did happen that you can recall?
Oh, yeah, lots.
Why don't you tell me about a couple?
I remember they taught us when we were doing our pre-mobilization training, they said, hey, listen, when you're out there, you need to be aware of your surroundings. And one thing to look for is the children. If the kids are around, that could be okay. It's a signal that they at least don't know of any danger in the area. I mean, they were thieves and they always wanted you to give them things, so you had to keep some distance. But it was a good sign that they were around. Well, I was doing something, pulling security somewhere. You get lax sometimes and your guard gets let down. I remember I was just BSing with the kids and maybe handing them some candy or something, and all of a sudden the kids they took off like cockroaches when the lights get flicked on, gone. And I remember it was an eerie feeling. All the hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I thought something bad was happening. And it just, the world slows down. And I'm looking all around. I'm out in the middle of the open. I've got no cover. I've got nowhere to go except for my vehicle. So I start moving back towards my vehicle to get closer to it. And real fast around the side of the vehicle, an Afghan comes around the vehicle with an AK-47. And I remember I pulled my weapon up, my safe to semi. I was in semi, ready to pull the trigger. And then everything kind of went clear to me, and I realized he was an Afghan National Policeman. So I almost killed him, but he put his hands up and he said, no, don't shoot, or whatever. And then I apologized to him, but he was just coming to whack the kids for being around me, actually. And that's why they ran away, because they knew they were about to catch a flogging. But I almost shot him.
Wow. Can you recall any other memorable incidents?
There was another time where we were in a village and everything seemed to be going all right, and I was doing the same thing, communicating with the populace and building up a rapport, and somehow one of my guys got engaged in a physical altercation with one of the teenagers in this village, because the guy had said he was going to place a bomb in the road or something next time we came into the village, and then he got physically confrontational with us. So I immediately moved to that, the side of that altercation, because it was one-on-one, and between the two of us, that Afghan went down pretty quickly, and he was on the ground, and I remember pulling my weapon out again and putting it right, like, danger close to him, and rotating my safety switch back to semi, and I was, just a finger pull away from killing this kid who was only probably 16 years old. But again, he stopped fighting, and then we zip cuffed him and did a personnel search and brought him back to the rear, and then the MPs back at Bagram questioned him, and I guess eventually he was released. But
when you were dealing with the civilians like this young man, what was their feeling towards you guys as American soldiers?
It was mixed throughout the country how people felt about you. Depended on where you were. The further south you went, there was a lot more Pashtun ethnic group, and I don't think they really felt too fondly about our presence in Afghanistan. And the further north you went, there was more like Uzbek and other types of nationalities, and they seemed to be more receptive to our presence. So it was a mixed bag depending on the population, and maybe depending on like actual recent events with Americans in the in that geography. So for instance, we went and destroyed a weapons cache that we had intelligence on. There were several old 105 millimeter rockets that were stashed away in this mountain across the valley from a village. So when we destroyed that, we laced it all up with C4, and then when we detonated it, parts of the mountain flew across the valley and destroyed like the first 2 rows of houses in this village. We had cordoned it off and vacated. We didn't hurt anybody, but we destroyed personal property. So, I mean, they may have already been Taliban sympathizers or anti-coalition militia sympathizers because there were weapons there. But when we went to make an apology and drop off humanitarian aid by air, we dropped off several pallets full of like winter coats and shoes and food. And rather than taking it and using it for whatever, they burned it. We caught it on drone. So I can tell that our actions there had not improved our relation with those particular people. But maybe it was already negative anyway, so. And we destroyed weapons that were within a range to this airfield that could have done damage, so.
Destroying weapons, actually, did you use your engineer training for that, or is that something else?
No, we actually had engineers come and do it while we pulled security like an infantryman.
What was so the year you were in Afghanistan, what was your overall impression of the country?
I hear it's a lot like Colorado, as far as you're talking the climate and the geography. I mean, there's some low-lying valleys that are very beautiful and green. You probably see some of those when you look through my pictures. You'll be surprised because that wasn't the impression I had, that wasn't what I had anticipated before I got to Afghanistan. I thought I was going to go to a barren desert. But as you approach higher altitudes, there's no water, so it gets more arid, and there's no vegetation up there, and it does look pretty barren. It was really hot in the summertime, and it was really cold in the wintertime. That was what Afghanistan was like, the climate was like. Over 100 in the summer, and you think your toes are going to fall off like you're in the Swiss Alps in World War II in the wintertime. So.
Were you in actual combat?
Yes.
Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, we had a mission to pull route reconnaissance and route clearance while that colonel I was telling you about was meeting with somebody of importance in some village in Afghanistan, in this valley. It was called Tagab Valley. And it was kind of like an L shape. Tagab, like T-A-G-A-B. It was like an L shape where I was responsible for one leg and somebody else was responsible for the other leg of this L. And it was pretty much just drive back and forth for hours and wait for this conversation between these two high-ranking officials to be completed. And those people had set up a pretty organized like area ambush against us, and we entered into an engagement that lasted 12 hours of intermittent combat where we'd engage the enemy and we'd gain fire superiority. The enemy would break contact and disappear, and then we'd drive on with our mission, go down the road 100 meters and get engaged again. And each time we got engaged, it was like the level of sophistication improved. So at first it was small arms fire, then it was small arms and RPGs, then it was small arms, RPGs, and mortars. And after 12 hours, we didn't have enough ammunition left to sustain that. We had, 30% or more of our vehicles were no longer mission capable. We had to tow them. And we were kind of pinned down trying to recover some vehicles in one of those legs of the L. So at that point, we consolidated all of our forces in that area to mass our effects. And we called in for air support, and an A-10 came and destroyed a compound where we were taking fire from, which had, not only did it have the militia who were fighting against us, but there was civilian population in that village as well. And so the A-10 came out, dropped out of the sky like a spaceship out of space, let loose its mini cannon, and all you heard was like, woof. and then there was like a firestorm on this village. Women and children came crying and running out of the village, and then we did not receive another gunfire from that area. We recovered our vehicles, and then we did our withdrawal back to another a site because we had a casualty that we needed to evac. So on the way out, they continued to assault us up the road, out this valley, the mouth of this valley, and we would fight back. But at this point, we were retrograding back to that site so we could meet up with the landing zone and have that Black Hawk come and take that casualty away. He wasn't dead; he was just injured.
Were there any casualties other than that one while you were over there in your unit?
We lost one soldier from my battalion, not from my company. Staff Sergeant Fanoff died from a IED right before Christmas in Madalarm province, which is one province to the northeast of our area of operation. I knew of him, and I had met him in our training, but what struck me was, he had 4 children and a wife. He was 36 years old. He was a staff sergeant. So I felt like there was some commonality between he and I. He was from Asheville, Connecticut, which is right outside of Storrs, Yukon area.
Ashford?
Yeah, Ashford. Eastford even, I think, now that you say that, Eastford. And I was getting ready to go on my mid-tour leave. What they do is, so you're there for a year, and they give everybody a 2-week block where you can go home and kind of recuperate and then come back to theater. And I felt guilty that here were the holidays and I was going to go and spend them with my family, and at that same time his body was being transported back to the United States and his family was going to be going to his funeral. So I remember that while I felt joyous to be with my family, I knew somebody that was in my battalion wasn't never going to have that again. So I felt guilty, I guess, about it. That why him, not me.
Were you awarded any medals or citations?
Yeah, I was awarded Army Commendation Medal for some work I had done where I was pulling security on a compound and stopped a vehicle-borne IED from entering a compound while the Major General of the 10th Mountain Infantry Division was meeting with somebody, the governor of this town called Charikar. So they gave me an Army Commendation for that. And then I got an Army Achievement Medal for my role as the convoy commander and for the deployment. And then they gave us the Global War on Terror Service Medal. They gave us the Afghan Campaign Medal. And then they gave us a Combat Infantry Badge for engaging with and destroying those enemies at Tagab Valley, too.
I'm going to switch gears and I'm going to ask you some questions about your daily life.
Okay.
How did you stay in touch with your family while you were overseas?
Really, it wasn't bad. Whenever we were at Bagram, it was very easy to communicate. We had internet that you could purchase for like $29 a month from this Indian company that worked there. So, it wasn't.
You each have your own.
Yeah, you had your own internet in your living area, so you could just go back to your place where your bed was, and email right from your whatever you call it, your hooch.
Internet service like pretty reliable.
It was kind of slow, but it was good enough to email. And I actually had, through that internet service, at the time I was using this voice over IP service. I can't remember what it was called, like Net Zero or one of them. And it was like $10 a month. I could have my own telephone line with an answering machine, and I could just put on a headset with a speaker and call home right from my room.
At any time?
Yeah, for $10 a month. From Afghanistan, I was calling back to Connecticut. So it was very different from in 1996 when I joined the Navy and wanted to call my wife from the ship. I had to pay $1 a minute to AT&T to call home. Now I could call for $10 a month, as much as I want.
That is different. How often Did you call home?
I tried to email at least every day if I was in Bagram. So if I was there, I made sure to communicate with my family every day. And if the internet service was good enough, I called every day if I could. So I talked to my family as much as I could. I didn't usually talk about what was going on with me. It was a lot of how are the kids doing, what's going on with them. 5 years ago, I had a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. So, she turned 5. My youngest started preschool, or it might have been 5 years old. Is that kindergarten? And she started kindergarten while I was gone, and preschool. And I missed all of that. So it was the only way I could be connected was to call and to email and to communicate as much as I could.
What was the food like?
I don't know, it was food. If you were on the base, they had a big DFAC, they call it, dining facility. So, I mean...
It was like a regular mess hall?
Yeah, it was like a regular, Fridays pizzas, and Thursday might be steak and lobster or whatever, and rock lobster. It wasn't very good, it was frozen stuff. But, whatever, pasta day or taco day, or... It was like...
You had 3 meals a day at the...
You had 3 meals a day available through the dining facility. We were an operational unit, so like I told you before, we were outside the wire every day, sometimes for several days or a week or two at a time. Then you didn't...
What did you do for food in those cases?
They had meals ready to eat, or these packaged meals that you could take with you.
How were those?
They're all right. I mean, it's like highly processed, highly preserved foods that, can last for several years at a time in a bag.
Did you always have enough supplies, ammunition, clothing, that kind of thing?
They issued us enough equipment. I never went hungry. We almost ran out of ammunition in a 12-hour firefight, but as soon as we got back to base, we were resupplied. There was never a moment when I couldn't get resupplied. So this was in 2006, 2007. So this had already been, National Guard soldier had already communicated with Donald Rumsfeld in Iraq during one town hall meeting and said, hey, what's going on? You're making us come over here and you're not equipping us. So those changes had already been made. And
So you felt fully equipped?
We were well equipped and well trained. I wasn't expecting to be there. And I'll admit, at first, I was probably resistant to have been stop-lossed, to have been converted to an infantryman. I felt a little bit I probably felt like I had been taken advantage of by my government at the time. But I did my job, and I feel proud to have served America now. I'm glad that I did it, and I wouldn't change it. But at the time, it was a hard pill to swallow.
Did you feel stress on the job?
Yeah.
How did you handle it?
You just deal with it. I don't know, how do you deal? You put your head down and keep going. I mean, when you think you're going to get shot, that's stress. Or you hear an ID go off, or you see little kids from Afghanistan blown into pieces and all over your truck, and you have to go and wash that off your truck now. You just kind of put it away and you just keep going. So then you talk about dealing with it. I guess you don't deal with it. You just do your job. So when you come home, you've missed your family for so long, and there's this huge high. And so there's a period of happiness, like this big happy time for a month or two when you get home. But then I remember feeling very dark and depressed for at least a year or two after coming home from Afghanistan. And that's when you deal with it. And I guess they call that post-traumatic stress or shell shock, or it's like you go from operating at this 100% speed or faster all the time to back to normal life, where you just feel like this total, like life has this lack of meaning and purpose now, and why is it you're doing anything? And as a person, you have to reconnect with yourself to make you whole again.
When you came home, were you discharged after you came home from Afghanistan?
No, I actually re-enlisted.
Your wife must love that.
Well, I re-enlisted, so I was stop-lost, You can come on through, sir. So I was stop lost, and I actually re-enlisted in Afghanistan for a $20,000 tax-free lump sum bonus because young family, 2 kids, and there was some financial hardship on my family while I was gone. So to do that made fiscal sense, and but it also meant I would serve 6 more years in the Guard.
Now,
And
to go back to the PTSD, when you came home from Afghanistan, you had actually just been going ahead doing your job and not dealing with the things you had seen. Now you're re-enlisted in the National Guard.
Yep.
Was your adjustment period, did you have PTSD? And was your adjustment to, because you weren't really adjusting to civilian life, but you were adjusting to life back in the United States?
wait, so where are we now in time? I re-enlisted in Afghanistan because I figured 6 years, a year of it, they stop lost me anyways. So that means I only got to do 5 more years when we get back. So
And that 5 years would be the typical...
a weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summertime, that kind of thing, yeah.
No chance for getting redeployed to Afghanistan?
Oh, I guess that, maybe I thought that, but that's not how it worked out. I didn't get deployed again, but my unit, the 1st of the 102nd Infantry, deployed again to Afghanistan from 2009 to 2010 and did another year in Afghanistan.
So when you came home from Afghanistan and you were still in the Guard, how was your readjustment at that point? Were you suffering PTSD?
Yeah, I must.
Did you know it?
I must have been, but I was in denial. I didn't know it, and it took until, a lot of anger outbursts at home, me mistreating my family. I never hit my family or anything, but just anger and, the kind of anger that makes your family scared of you. And you shouldn't have your young children scared of you because you could lose your temper and go from 0 to 100 angry and, just because they won't brush their teeth. So it took my wife telling me that there's something wrong with you, and if you don't fix yourself, then, this relationship's going to end.
So what did you do to get help?
I went to the local vet center in Norwich and started seeing a counselor, started doing some activities that they talked about that would be helpful to improve that. You had the journaling, so I would start journaling like the types of things that were going on around me when I would have these outbursts, and then I started to realize what types of environments I needed to avoid. I was scared of balloons for a long time because if they popped around me, I just couldn't take that sudden loud noise. It was just fireworks. I couldn't go to the fireworks at 4th of July without getting upset. And so I went to the vet center and I went to the VA and I talked to those counselors, and then I think I got myself so focused on finishing my undergraduate degree. I was working full time. I was going to Central 3 or 4 days a week, and I was just never home. And before I know it, a year and a half is gone, and I'm feeling better about myself, and I'm treating my family better. And now I know something was wrong, because I felt very depressed and unhappy. And I've talked to other soldiers, and it happens to them too. So time and recognition that there's a problem and seeking help is what's going to fix those people. And having a strong family and support network.
Did you do anything special for good luck while you were overseas?
My stepfather gave me this dime that he had carried with him when he used to go underway. He was a submariner. So I carried that in my wallet the whole time.
Do you still have it?
I gave it back to him, actually. And I had carried both of my brothers are active duty in the Army, and I had carried one of my brother's dog tags with me for the entire deployment as well. But maybe that was just to feel close to him too, I don't know.
What did people do for entertainment when you weren't on duty?
You could play video games, go to the gym, work out. You could, I don't know, we had a little basketball court. We played basketball sometimes. Go for a run.
Did you see any USO shows?
They had a couple USO shows there while I was there, but I never they turned into big maddening crowds that I didn't really like to be around at the time. And actually our whole unit pretty much avoided it. It was mostly they called them fobbits, or people who, the people who were stuck inside the compound. They would all go to the shows, and we would just kind of stay away from the shows.
Well, what does fobbit mean?
Somebody who never left the wire.
Oh.
It was like a take on Tolkien's, the Lord of the Rings hobbits. So.
Now, you said you had, halfway through your tour, you had a 2-week leave to go home?
Yeah.
Did you have any other leave?
No.
So you came home to the United States for 2 weeks?
I did, during the holiday season, and spent Christmas with my family.
That was in 2006?
Yep.
2007?
Yep, 2006, 2007. I didn't spend New Year's. It was one holiday or the other. So as you could come home before Christmas and be home for Christmas, but you had to be back for New Year's or vice versa. That way more people could have the opportunity to have some holiday at home. Somebody else got Thanksgiving, you tried to share it with your platoon as best you could.
What was your opinion of the officers and of your fellow soldiers?
Actually, my fellow soldiers are still friends of mine today. And my squad leader has a barbecue at his house. Actually, my other squad leader, because it changed at some point. His name is Joseph Charbonneau, owns a place in Columbia, Connecticut. He's got a daughter about the same age as my youngest daughter. Every year he does a barbecue, and we all kind of get back together. And I hadn't gone to it actually until last year, so this will be my second year. It's the weekend before 4th of July, so we're all going to get back together again, and it's been very nice to see those people. Well, a lot of them got out of the Army, went about their separate ways, and went back to their civilian lives. He's actually a painter in Columbia, like a house painter, owns his own business. And
So you still stay in touch with several of them?
yeah.
All right, so when you were in Afghanistan, you re-enlisted. When you came home, do you recall when that was?
May 2007.
And what was the rest of your 6-year stint in the National Guard?
Oh, how did it go from now till now when I should be getting out, you mean?
You're not out yet?
No, I re-enlisted again. I told you, however rubbed wrong I felt then, now I really am proud to have done what I did, and I plan on serving the remainder of my time, maybe 30 years in the Guard. Since I've been home, I was mobilized already for something called Operation Snow Day, and I don't know if you remember, was it 2 years ago, those heavy snows we got? Well, there were 3 or 4 feet of snow on the schools in Naugatuck, Connecticut, and those buildings were at risk of collapsing. Well, my unit got mobilized, and we went and we spent shifts for 3 days shoveling the roofs of these buildings off to save these public facilities, and so that we could maintain services to those kids in that town. They could continue to be educated, and we saved the taxpayers probably millions of dollars in assets that could have been damaged. And those missions, I think, are important, and I'm proud to be a part of those missions.
So since you came home in 2007 until now, which is 2012, that's 5 years?
Yep.
You've been in the Guard the whole time?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And you go to the training, and what other missions?
Well, here's the thing. When I came back, they told all the guys that were 242 engineers, sorry we made you infantrymen, good job, this is a great deployment. If you want, you can retrain to any other job you want and transfer to another unit, so long as there's a vacancy available. So I transferred to a unit here in Groton, Connecticut. It's called the 1109th AVCRAD at the time. Now it's called the 1109th TASM-G. And I reclassified to an avionics technician, where I was fixing like the electronics on helicopters. And I did that from 2008 till just last year, when I started a program called Officer Candidate School, where you go through some training, and at the end of it you get commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army. So on August 18th, I graduate from OCS with a commission as second lieutenant in the Army Signal Corps, and I'll be attached to the 169th Aviation Regiment out of Enfield, Connecticut.
This was last August?
No, this August, like in a month. No, I'm not yet. Okay. August 18th. So I'm still staff sergeant, yeah, or I'm an officer candidate now, is what they call us.
So are you actually still in training?
Yeah, this is Friday. Tomorrow is my drill weekend, and this is my last weekend of Phase 2 OCS. We're going to go out and do our field leadership exercise and prepare ourselves for phase 3. In July, I'll go to 2 weeks of training at Fort McClellan, Alabama, where you go through like a water survival course, a leadership reaction course. You do a field leadership exercise where you're put into a position of leadership. You demonstrate your troop leading procedures, your ability to use the 5-paragraph op order. This is like the Army's leadership style. And then come back August 18th, I get a commission, and I'm assigned to that unit in Enfield. And from there, I don't know what's going to happen. People are still deploying. The AVCRAD unit that I was at, the aviation unit, sent a detachment just last week or 2 weeks ago to Afghanistan to help support those flight operations. And units are still being deployed to support these conflicts. So what's going to happen to me? I don't know.
Now, you said that
I'm more
you did
prepared.
go back to school on the GI Bill. What did
Yeah.
you get your degree in?
Before I deployed, I'd earned a 2-year degree in general studies and a 2-year degree in engineering technology. I came back, went to Central, and got a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Technology, Technology Management. And then next month I graduate from the University of New Haven with a master's degree in Engineering and Operations Management.
So back to the engineering.
Well, it's a different kind of, it's not civil engineering, it's more like industrial.
Could you speak a little bit on what you know it was like for the family? Because I know you said you were married and you had 2 kids when you were deployed. What was that like for your family?
We talked about communication. The fact that we were able to communicate, I think, made it a little easier for them. When you don't hear from somebody and you know they're at war, you wonder, are they still alive? Has something happened? You see on the news all the time, IED here, 6 U.S. soldiers killed, a helicopter crashed, 18 dead. So the families are always wondering, is that my loved one? No, it can't be. But maybe it, so to be able to communicate helps to take some of that away. But at the same time, they're home, they have to do everything that you used to do. So now they're doing what they did plus what you did. And for my family, I had 2 young children. So now they're wondering, where's their father? Why did he leave? And maybe feeling some abandonment kind of issues going on at home that they're dealing with too. So they're trying to do all of this, keep everything together, and worrying that you may never come home. I think that's difficult. I think it's a hard job to try and march on like nothing's wrong and never know if the person who's like your best friend and your partner in life is going to come back.
Your wife didn't want you to enlist in the first place, so how is she handling all these several re-enlistments?
Well, my wife's my best friend. I was in the Navy when we got married. We got married on the beach down in Florida, on Jack's Beach in Jacksonville, Florida. Been married 14 years now. And while we may have disagreed about joining the Army initially, and I know it was hard on her, not only my deployment, but then my being a jerk when I came home, because, right? So I think she sees that I came through this a stronger person. I know that she's proud to be married to somebody and to be a part of this process of being somebody who serves America. So she gives me nothing but support. The weekends that I'm away and she has to deal with things, or the extra pressure I've been under this last year because I'm in officer candidate school, and the drills kind of extend into your real life now. Leadership doesn't end when you punch the clock. Leadership is a 24-hour thing. And so how's she dealing with it? I think she understands, and she's supportive of it. And now she knows we're kind of vested. So you hit this point where there's no return point. I've been in 14 years served now, so almost 15 years served now. Can you turn back on that? I don't think so.
So you'll stay in probably until you retire?
I'll stay in 20 at least, and I might keep going. Because
as an officer, once August comes and you graduate and you'll be an officer, what will your responsibilities be?
Well, my first billet, I was assigned to, it's called the S6, or the Staff Communications Signal Officer, to this aviation unit, where I'll be responsible for like communications and internet IT stuff. But as an officer, you have a greater ability to impact the training and the mentorship to the younger soldiers. So that's why, having known a couple of soldiers who committed suicide upon return from our deployments, and having known what I went through, I want to be in a position where I can better affect the training and the environment and the culture, so that they know that there's an opportunity to go get help, go get it. And I can be somebody who went through it, came through the backside stronger for having gone through it, and act as an example to them that it's possible to get help, and there's no stigma about getting help. So that's why I think I may stay for a long time to come.
How did your military experience influence your thinking about war and about the military in general?
I think, the United States of America stands for the greatest principles of freedom and democracy out of any nation in the world today. So those people who risk their lives and give their time and sacrifice are great Americans that I'm proud to be a part of that group of people. War, on the other hand, I feel war is like a failure of diplomacy. And whenever peoples have to go to war, I hope that our leadership has done everything possible to come up with some kind of amicable diplomatic solution first. But again, if we're called to war and those things have failed us, then I'm glad we're serving the people of the United States of America.
Andy, have you joined any veterans organizations?
I haven't, actually. I've talked with the American Legion folks up in Griswold, Connecticut, because they're doing a big project up there for a veterans home. I don't know if you've seen it in the news. It's there was an old mill that they converted into a home for homeless veterans. So my officer candidate class had donated, we made some money from some fundraising that we did, and we donated some money to that group. And then when I was talking to him, about some of my background and history, he asked me to join, but I'm kind of busy.
Yeah,
So I don't know. I mean, I could join, but what would my involvement be?
How would you say that your military service has affected your life?
Well, I told you I was doing poorly in college. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and at a minimum, I was given training. I was given the opportunity to see what it's like to be part of a team, to feel like you're a part of something bigger than yourself, and I guess the military helped me to become a man. To go from being this awkward boy who doesn't know what he wants to do with himself to being a man who knows you might never know what you want to do, but you might as well just give everything 110%, love your family, love your country, and help those around you.
Andy, are there any other memorable incidents or stories that you can recall that we haven't discussed?
I don't know. I'm trying to think. I mean, there was lots of stuff.
You'll think of it when
Yeah, when we're done, I'm sure it'll come to me.
10 other things.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add to this interview?
I guess, no, God bless America. What?
Well, thank you for your service and thank you for your interview.